Okay, so afternoon coffee as I'm waiting for the FedEx truck, which looks like it might not be getting here today, because we're getting a little bit late in the afternoon for the overnight shipment that I paid extra for from Seek Thermal. We'll see what happens on that. But we're apart from getting that little dig, because I spent $600 on 3 of their thermal cameras, and they have nothing to show for it when I paid extra for the fast shipping. So we'll be starting my videos with that little note as I talk about other things. So what we're going to talk about is the jihadist beheading over in Oklahoma in the last couple days, why the FBI is investigating it, and why the conclusions of the investigation aren't as readily apparent to some people as they are others. Now, under normal hate crime definitions, a crime, it doesn't need to be a crime of violence. It could be other types of crimes, even misdemeanors, and or a simple assault. But generally speaking, if somebody is given a choice of converting to Islam, and don't forget that conversion happens at the lowest rung. So it means that you surrender to Islam, you become now the new guy or the new girl, and you'll be at the bottom of the food chain until you do several things to prove yourself to be worthy of going up the food chain. And the idea was that conversion by sword would be, convert, or they'll cut your head off, and you can be a martyrdom to Buddhism or Christianity or Judaism or whatever you choose to be. You can be a martyr to your religion or convert to the lowest rungs of Islam. Believe me, it's not equality. Although, in their sense of equality, you may be given the opportunity to martyr somebody else. So, okay, great. Now you want to prove you're one of us, you get to cut somebody else's head off. And it's obviously an evil thing, and it's illegal in this country, people. Yes, it is illegal in this country to behead people for refusing to convert to the way of life which you've determined for them. Remember, so although it is illegal in this country, it is not commonly prosecuted. In fact, Islamic hate crime prosecutions are exceedingly rare. And when we go to the FBI website, we get to look at some old history of the KKK and the bombing of a black Southern Baptist church by the KKK as the focus of FBI hate crime and their primary examples in history on how they want to make sure that white Christian Americans aren't misbehaving against anybody else. Now you'll notice no references to Dearborn, Michigan, or the Arab festivals where Arab Muslims were beating up on Arab Christians whenever the opportunity presented itself. And in fact, some of those people ended up getting jobs at the Justice Department, and who knows what they're orchestrating now, but we can see, with that and with appeasing certain aspects of that community, we see arrests of Christian groups or Christian individuals who they perceive to be a threat to the jihad. Now, when we talk about whether or not that's fair or unfair treatment or street level, ground level retaliation for these acts overseas or perhaps in Dearborn, Michigan, we can look at another current event like Eric Frayne. He's handling his own business with those who he has a grievance against, okay? But there is something in European history called the pogrom. And a pogrom was kind of like, the best way to describe it was a crusade for cowards. Now, the phrase anti-Semitism was used because Europeans tended to equally hate Jews and Muslims, or they associated Jews and Muslims because at that time, prior to Jews mostly interbreeding with Europeans, Jews in Europe had mostly interbred with Europeans, it was considered to be prejudice against Middle Eastern people. But under those circumstances, war against Islam was usually pretty open. That was called the Crusades. But if somebody wanted to have a street level, local level, engage in a bunch of prejudice and looting and mob attacks on individuals, they would have a pogrom. Now, the question has been, because a lot of white Jews work in the legal system, and that is something you probably want to look up on Wikipedia on your own as far as a definition of the pogroms and how those work, because that's what people are saying there needs to be a guard against happening in the United States. The pogroms were institutionalized hate crimes, and they would fall under the hate crime thing also. On the other hand, you can't go so far in protecting somebody against hate crimes that you're helping them indulge in those crimes on their own. But when we get into the beheading incident, we're also looking at, there's a little bit of misrepresentation happening with regards to the circumstances of Alton Nolen. The misrepresentation is probably too subtle for most people to recognize without understanding some of the background facts of Alton Nolen's life. Background fact is he's a felon on parole or probation. It's not really clear at this stage whether he's on parole or probation, but he is, or has been. Under parole and probation rules, when somebody is fired from a job, they go to jail, usually. 9 times out of 10. They're going to go to jail. And with that come other things that happen. They could lose their apartment. They could lose their car. They could be not making their car payments. There's a lot of very practical things that can happen when somebody gets pulled out of their life and sent to jail for a little while. And in circumstances like this, it's when they get fired from a job. That's also when you look at felon-friendly employers, I'll call it, or employers that hire people specifically on parole and probation, because there's a much larger number of employers that either will comply with the ban the box rules and not ask about criminal history, or they are afraid of getting sued, or they simply, it might be a felon-owned business or something like that, where they're going to say, listen, somebody's off paper, that's fine, because we just don't want the probation people coming around and raiding the workplace. I know a construction company owner out in Tillamook, Oregon. He had 3 of his 5 construction employees were felons on probation, and his job sites would get raided by the police in Tillamook. They were at gunpoint. They would go in, they'd make a big spectacle, blocking off the street. All of his employees were held at gunpoint until the 3 felons on probation were separated. And of course, when the police go into a job site and raid it like that, everybody goes against the wall, and everybody's ID gets checked. Everybody gets a wants and warrants check. And if you've got some guy with unpaid traffic tickets or child support or something like that, he goes to jail too. The 3 felons were being taken to jail just for drug testing. There was no warrant, there was no nothing. But because they were under rules which placed them under much more stricter levels of government supervision and reduce the levels of safeguards for constitutional rights that police have to deal with people on parole and probation, it seriously impacted the business, because not only did that builder have to deal with his non-felon employees being treated that way for the duration of the arrest period, but there are people on the street, there's the people that he was working for, people he's building a house for, like, okay, why are the cops raiding your job site? So in that sense, very specific employers tend to be the people that hire people on parole and probation. Vallon Foods over in that part of Oklahoma was owned by a relatively well-connected family, where Mark Vaughn was also a reserve SWAT cop, gun guy. And under those circumstances, they would probably be authorized to hire people with some sort of violent felony history, because they're working in situations where they're being supervised by an armed police officer. Now, also realize this is somebody who's they've gone through the prison system, they've gone through maybe the work release system or something like that. So there's been a reduced level of supervision in their life, but they're working when there's an armed cop around. If for whatever reason he feels he's not in control, or the employer or the company feels they're really not in control of this individual, they have the right to terminate their employment, and there's an automatic judgment that they go back to jail until something gets sorted out with that. Under this circumstance, getting back to the pogrom situation, when somebody said that Nolen was offensively trying to recruit somebody to Islam, we don't know if he was just talking about it. I know Christians who had been, their employment was threatened or they're fired from jobs for proselytizing in the workplace. Proselytizing is illegal in some countries. It's illegal in most Muslim countries. It's illegal in Israel. It happens, but it is technically illegal in most Muslim countries, and it is illegal in Israel to do the street preacher saving souls type of thing. And because of that, there's a bit of retaliatory action in if certain people see Muslims doing that under circumstances where they have the right to be in control or perceive the right to be in control. They would retaliate against Muslims for doing that because they feel, hey, wait, that activity is illegal in Muslim countries, so we're gonna punish somebody for doing it here, and that is looking like what Nolen was being fired over. The other thing is we don't know what level of it was, but these were not necessarily somebody who was just simply put their knees and told to convert or die. Nolen is 30 years old. One of the victims is 54. The other is 43. Their race is unclear, just from the names and that sort of a thing. But the religious nature of a convert or die thing is what would make it a hate crime, even if everybody involved was the same race. And the other thing, of course, is a gender issue. And where the hate crime definition would come up on a gender issue is that when you have a forced conversion to Islam in connection with a marriage or engagement relationship or something like that, and there's a subservient role, like the woman's being told, you're going to have to quit your job, I don't want you working anymore because we're getting married, you're my wife, you're going to convert to Islam, or the guys from the mosque are going to come and beat some sense into you. Well, at that point, you're not just looking at domestic abuse, but as say, bringing people in from the mosque or something like that. Well, then that's where you can get into a hate crime, a gender-based hate crime. What will happen under these circumstances is that there probably does need to be a dialogue on a lot of this stuff, because yes, we're going to be very sensitive to the question whether or not jihad has come to America. On the other hand, we're also going to look at all of these other things of, you got a stressed out probation felon in the workplace, you've got, he's being supervised by an armed cop, you've got a hostile work environment, and he went off, he retaliated to the hostile work environment. And did he go off for no good reason? Could be, I don't know. It's obviously a criminal act. Obviously, he beheaded somebody. He's going away for a long time. But there are reasons why the FBI would be hesitant to just immediately classify this as a hate crime or a jihad-related thing. And that gets into the responsibility of anybody who would have been encouraging him to do it. And that includes somebody who's marching around New York City holding a sign that says somebody should be beheaded for insulting Islam. Okay, that's very un-American. And when you look at the Centers for Un-American Activities and Investigations for Un-American Activities, they were eventually considered hate groups by the late 70s. Most of them were shut down in the mid-80s because of their associations with the John Birch Society, which was a non-government organization which I was a member of for a short time. And when we look at what is un-American behavior, I think, just me, that if you advocate beheading somebody for, let's say, a religious insult, there's a level of responsibility in making those statements. I would advocate violence in retaliation for violence. Somebody does something, and maybe you gotta wait. Maybe you can't do it personally, but some friends might have to do it. I understand that because the justice you have is the justice you make. But there's a very, very distinct difference between that and instigating a pogrom in the name of something, which is quite possibly what was going on over there in Oklahoma. Okay, they might have come down on this guy because they found out he was a Muslim, but not because he's really trying to run around, find every hot-looking chick and try to force her to join his harem. I don't know. We don't know. And we may not even know after the FBI does their investigation because they have a lot of reasons to conceal the truth on this. Among the many reasons is they probably don't necessarily want the general public to know the levels of stress that a coworker is under where, if they get fired, they lose everything. And it's not just a matter of losing their job. They go to jail, they lose their apartment, they lose their car, they're not making their car payments anymore. They're not making their insurance payments anymore. They might lose a driver's license, all because they got fired from a job. And that, a lot of people would comment in some forums about how a cashier at a mart store was acting very peculiar, very, very scared, like she had to do things a certain way, only say things a certain thing. And how could a low-wage job be that important to somebody? Well, it's not just the economic factor. A lot of those people are going to be working those jobs under circumstances where they're afraid of going to jail. And if they go to jail, immediately upon arrest, it's kind of like in that TV show Bait Car. Somebody finds out their car was left in a parking lot, so that gets towed. They lose that. They find out they're not at their apartment. Rent comes and goes. The due date for rent comes and goes. The landlord finds out they were in jail. They go, they loot the house, and they auction the goods. And that's that. So people are obviously going to be very scared of living in that situation. And that is a breeding ground for rebellion. That's a breeding ground for somebody to say, listen, we're not going to take that crap anymore, and if they do this, I'll do that. The question is whether or not they're coordinating with other people. I think in the Nolen case, that's not what happened. I think he's just, had a short fuse and went off. But the question is, did somebody light that fuse? Did somebody at work light that fuse? Did somebody knowingly light that fuse by firing him for being a Muslim or for saying, yeah, I converted to Islam in prison, I think it's a good religion, whatever. So it's not quite as cut and dry, but under a circumstance where somebody says convert or die, that is clearly a hate crime. Whether or not it gets prosecuted and whether or not the FBI has shown favoritism to Muslim instigated or Muslim practiced hate crimes, those are separate issues, and we can't connect all of those dots in the Alton Nolen Mark Vaughn case.